One of the more punitive and pernicious portions of Obamacare was that if you could not show that you had an insurance policy, the IRS, remember the reference to the IRS expanding its reach and its numbers? Wait a second, I thought this was supposed to be about health care, or at least health insurance. Why did the IRS need to add all these new people, all these new powers? Was the IRS going to be digging into our lives? And the answer was yes. So, as Reason Magazine has written, following President Donald Trump's executive order instructing agencies to provide relief from the health law, the Internal Revenue Service appears to be taking a more lax approach to the coverage requirement. Our guest is Craig Gottwals with BenefitRevolution.com. He's been our guest before. He follows Obamacare all day to the point that you can't ask him how the day is going without him wanting to talk about Obamacare. He is something of an expert in the matter, and thank goodness that he is.
Something of,
yes. Well, we don't want to overblow this thing. It's better that you sound smarter than I make you out to be, and they'll go, I undersold you. So,
there you go.
First of all, Craig, what has the Trump executive order exactly done? And then we'll talk about how that affects people who have already filed or are about to file.
Well, it's funny because when Trump first got into office, and one of the first things he said was he wanted Tom Price to be the HHS secretary, which I thought, wow, that was a good move. I was very impressed by that. And then he signs that executive order directing basically all of his administrative agencies to go easy on the enforcement of Obamacare. And I really, along with I think many other experts in the field, thought that was just a bit more of a showy kind of thing than anything substantive. Well, I was wrong. It was very substantial because just last week the IRS came forth and in a pretty stealth, somewhat undercover, very underreported maneuver, the IRS said, look, on line 61 where you used to have to report either that you had insurance or that you were going to opt to pay the fine, we're going to go ahead and we're going to accept your IRS filing if you just go ahead and leave line 61 blank.
So when you say stealth, you're not in any way suggesting that they're doing anything untoward or that they're doing anything necessarily secretive. It just hasn't been widely reported on.
Yes, especially because this is at the regulatory level in the IRS. I mean, there can be nothing more mundane and boring to the general public. So this is not the kind of story the AP or Reuters grabs onto, generally speaking. And I think basically because Obamacare is so complicated, I think a lot of people didn't really understand that what this effectively means is somebody can go ahead and not have health insurance this year, and they don't have to incriminate themselves and say, I'm volunteering to pay that fine. They can just go ahead and submit their tax form by leaving line 61 blank. And now where it gets interesting, Michael, is, the executive shall enforce the laws, right? So when pressed on this, the IRS was asked, well, if somebody leaves line 61 blank, will you then automatically go after them? And the IRS basically said, well, no comment on that. We reserve the right to review all filings. But what we're saying is we will not automatically reject a filing that leaves that line blank, because that's the way it was slated to happen 2 weeks ago. If you submitted a filing with nothing on line 61, they were automatically not going to accept it and come back at you. So this doesn't sound like a huge deal on its face, and because it is IRS regulations, a lot of people miss it. But the reality is this is a way that Trump legally can very, very deeply undercut that individual mandate.
And let's talk about what that means for the average individual. Young person, early in their career, the ones probably most likely to not buy health insurance, and they still didn't buy health insurance, and they're assuming, well, now I'll have to pay the fine because I didn't pay health insurance because that was cheaper than getting health insurance. And now they get ready to file their taxes for the year of 2016, now in 2017. And and line 61 says, hey, did you maintain health insurance? And they go, I'm not going to fill that in because I've heard the IRS isn't going to punish me if I don't have it. They're not going to dig deeper, right? How much of a savings is that?
That's a good question too, because the savings is 2.5% of your household income, or $695, whichever amount is more. So if you're a full-time employee, it's going to be the 2.5% of your household income, and if you have a two-income household, for example, I mean that can be a rather substantial. If you cobble together $100,000, right, this is a $2,500 fine per family member, by the way. So let's say you have a two-income household and you have 3 people in your family and you make $100,000. Well, now you're looking at a $7,500 fine. But let's say you make half of that, then, $3,750. Still a substantial amount of money for a family making $50,000.
A substantial amount of money.
Yeah.
And especially if they're a person that made the decision. I don't think it's wise not to buy health insurance. I also believe that the individual should get to make that decision for themselves.
That's right.
And if they made that decision, they risk the fact that they may not have coverage for some things. But now those who risk that won't also be penalized with this extra fine that you'd basically be paying the government.
That's exactly right. And you and I have talked about on your show before that what Obamacare did was it forced upon people very large, bloated, huge, high-premium insurance policies. And as you and I have also discussed, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for people under 30 in many cases to necessarily buy those kinds of policies.
Right.
So they might have a non-qualifying, what's called an old mini-med type of plan.
Right. Or catastrophic, maybe. Craig, can you hold with me for just a moment?
Yeah.
Craig Gottwals, benefitrevolution.com. For all the talk about Trump insulting the media that they're enemies of the American people, this is way more important to your life.
The Michael Berry Show.
Craig Gottwals is our guest. We're talking about Obamacare. His site is benefitrevolution.com. He deals with Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, as it was known, with a lot of his time and energy, and has for a while. And we reach out to him on frequent occasion to get input as changes are made and as this process developed. Craig, since this move, this executive order by the president didn't obliterate the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, only Congress can actually make that change. When and how are they going to do that?
Oh, that's a great question. Obviously, that's the topic of much debate right now in Congress and within the Republican Party, frankly. I think it's reasonable to expect that they'll have something done in that matter by summertime, by the end of summer. And I think it's reasonable to expect that we could have a framework for moving forward and sort of buttoning up the loose ends on Obamacare that would start, as early as 1/1 of next year, for example.
But when it would go into effect.
Yeah, I think that's the most reasonable expectation. People talk about 2 years, but I think that's a very bad idea because you got midterm elections coming, and you really want to get this locked down, and you want to have a framework in place to transition out of Obamacare, within this calendar year, so that you maybe even have a 1 or 2 year transition period where subsidies or people are weaned off of subsidies. Exchanges can be allowed to kind of shrink and die on their own, essentially, which is going to happen with or without new legislation. These these carriers are losing money and they're going to be getting out of Obamacare. So you're going to have many, many counties in this country that have zero carriers available in the exchange.
Well, we're already seeing that, right, with Aetna.
That you are.
Craig,
Yeah,
what is the low-hanging fruit? What are the easy things to take out of Obamacare that very few people will complain about and will give some level of comfort and improvement to people and to industry?
Well, the two biggest things. The one biggest thing for industry would be to get rid of the employer mandate. Now, that one it's a little harder to do, but the second biggest one for the freedom of the individual is to get rid of this individual mandate. And essentially, in all practical effects, that's what this IRS, the executive order coupled with the IRS change did, because you asked me if anything was untoward or illegal about the action, and the answer is no. But had the IRS come out and said, you don't have to fill out line 61, and oh, by the way, if you don't fill out line 61, we're never going to ask about it, that actually probably would not pass constitutional muster, because now you're just directly refusing to enforce the law of the land. But by saying, no, we reserve the right to ask you about line 61 upon a further inquiry, basically what the Trump administration and the IRS did was give themselves plausible deniability cover to say, oh, no, we're still enforcing the law. We're just making it a self-reported violation now, instead of saying we're automatically going to reject your application. Look, I find it hard to believe they're going to fine anybody who leaves that line blank. Now, if you have other irregularities in your tax return, I can see them coming after you. But there's no reason to make this IRS change unless, in fact, the goal of the Trump administration is not to fine anybody under the individual mandate, which really gets at, I think, 50% of the heart of Obamacare as it relates to the individual and individual liberties and freedoms. Now, what really gets to the economy is the employer mandate, and that will take a little bit more doing. But again, that's very doable this year. Another, you asked
well,
for low-hanging
and
fruit.
that's what keeps people from hiring at the 50 employee threshold and prevents companies that want to grow from growing.
That's exactly right. It keeps people, two things. It keeps an employer from wanting to grow beyond 50 employees, and it keeps an employer who is beyond 50 employees from wanting to employ you more than 29 hours a week.
Right.
Because as long as you're less than 30, they get out of it.
But that's the one I'm watching people. I mean, I personally know people who had full-time jobs that are now down to 29.5-hour jobs and picking up scrap jobs, as a bar back or a waiter or whatever. I mean, I would think that if, I asked you the low-hanging fruit and you say that's it, I would think that if you could change that, all the activity, you remember in the Flintstones when they would spin their wheels and they would hit and shoot off? It feels like there are a lot of companies out there that are spinning and just waiting for that opportunity to drop down and shoot off. Do you like my Flintstone analogy or no?
Yeah, I love your Flintstone analogy, actually. And I think it's right. The reality is, with these carriers losing money, with this IRS action on the individual mandate, if we could just get rid of the employer mandate or some similar non-enforcement mechanism on some other sleight of hand at the IRS level, Obamacare is gone, because there's really nothing left of the law that would impede upon somebody. I mean, there's some stupid piddly coverage mandates that we could work on. I mean, we could let kids stay on their parents' plan until they're 26, 27, or 28, or however long people want to do it. That's really not a big deal. People liked it, so fine, you could keep that. But if you get rid of these two mandates and you have insurers losing money that are going to pull out of exchanges, Obamacare is nothing but a shell anymore.
Wow.
I mean, that's the heart of it, right?
Yeah,
the heart of it is you have to buy it, you have to provide it, and these insurers are here to provide it. Well, if the insurers aren't there to provide it, you don't have to buy it, and the employers don't have to provide it, you've really undercut the law. That's what Trump, in his inartful sort of fractured syntax way, was trying to say months ago when he made some comments to the effect of, we could just let this thing die on its own.
Right.
And that's really what he was getting at.
Right. Well, and yeah, what he was saying is that it's not workable, and it was going to, of its own, whether you want to use the term die or not. And I think some people get attached to this idea that Obama is trying to help us, and now Trump is killing off whatever was trying to help us. I think if we can take back the language and say there were restrictions on companies hiring people for full-time jobs and providing good insurance coverage, which Obama called Cadillac plans. There were penalties on individuals who were making the decision that was best for them, and we're going to get the government out of all that and let people thrive. I think if people can just see that, the stock market increases we've seen will continue on pace for a while.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's a worldview thing, right? Either your worldview is such that you believe more government is better and can fix things, or your worldview is such that you want to shrink the government and let the free market do the work.
Craig Gottwals, benefitrevolution.com. Always a pleasure to have you on, sir. I'm glad.
Awesome,
I'm
Michael.
glad you know everything about Obamacare. You do, because you keep us halfway informed, and that's not your shortcoming. That's ours. Because I just can't get can't get as excited about this stuff as you do. But I'm glad people like you are out there.
Well, we'll just have to go bass fishing instead.